And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Okay, the main weather feature on the map for tonight. Low pressure here just east of Kodiak Island, pushing heavier rain and wind into the southeast coast. Got gale warnings out for the North Gulf Coast tonight, back in toward the Barren Islands. Winds gusting 50 miles per hour with rain over heaviest along the North Gulf Coast here, possibly heavy at times here along the north coast of the Panhandle, Yakutat on down towards Sitka. And chance of rain increases here into Cook Inlet eastward, and mostly southern Copper River Basin hung up in the Coast Range. Dry in the interior, scattered showers to the Alaska Peninsula. Still some gusty northwest winds out here, but winds becoming much lighter for Kodiak Island, as well as the rainfall won't be quite as heavy, but kind of persistent there. And gusty west winds continue for the central and eastern Arctic coast due to that trough there associated with a low up in the Arctic Ocean. Not much going on out over the Bering Sea. A couple of high centers out here with a weak trough right there that tomorrow brings chance of showers, light rain, fog, drizzle, that sort of thing into the Pribilof Islands. Otherwise isolated showers, the Alaska Peninsula, continuing to decrease those northwest winds. And sunshine here, lower Yukon River Valley into the Delta, partly to mostly cloudy for the Kuskokwim Delta. And still looking at some gusty winds for the eastern Arctic coast with a chance of some rain or snow showers up there. Isolated showers, mostly cloudy skies, upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country. This low slowly weakening, and the front just weakening as it slides eastward, keeps it wet over the southeast coast. But by tomorrow afternoon, rainfall won't be quite as heavy as today, especially up here to the north, but it'll be persisting over the southern southeast coast tomorrow. And then for the day on Sunday, looks like showery conditions here for the southeast coast. Periods of light rain, say Elfin Cove to Yakutat, maybe as far west as Cordova, otherwise showers over the southeast interior here. Fair amount of sunshine clearing over the north central areas, right on down the Kuskokwim Valley. Still mostly cloudy though east of the Alaska Range. Cook Inlet, Manuska in the valley with showers. Chance of showers Kodiak Island, northeast Bristol Bay, and the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, no big storms or heavy weather this weekend. Next front starting to push some increasing wind and rain way out there to the west. And for the coastal water forecast, south winds 20 knots here for the southern Panhandle, south to southeast 15 on the central coast, the north coast southeast 15 to 20 knots. Seas out here running anywhere from 7 to 9 feet. And for Lynn Canal, winds due east 15 knots, seas 3 feet, and south or northwest winds at 20 knots for Stevens Passage. And those seas forecast to be up around 9 feet with that 20-knot wind, and south at 20 knots with 8-foot seas for Clarence Strait. Then for Sunday, Clarence Strait, south winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet, 2-foot seas with a southeast wind at 10 knots for Stevens Passage. Lynn Canal, southeast winds 15 knots. Light southwest breeze here for the south coast at 10 knots, central coast south at 15, and east southeast at 15 knots for the north coast. Prince William Sound tomorrow, east winds at 20 knots, and the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 20 knots, 7-foot seas, northeast at 20. Here for the western North Gulf Coast, as well as the Barren Islands, and north winds 25 knots for Kamishak Bay and southern Cook Inlet. North of Kenai, though, northeast at 15. And then for the day on Sunday, light variable winds, 10 knots for the Cook Inlet area, Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast, and the eastern North Gulf Coast, looking at east to northeast winds at 15 knots, with northeast winds at 10 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds, 20 knots for Saturday, southeast 15 for Bristol Bay. Kind of a variable wind pattern here at 10 to 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. And then on Sunday, variable to west winds, 10 to 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, west winds 15 knots for Bristol Bay. Light winds at 10 knots or less for Kodiak Island, seas running 3 to 4 feet. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. On average, east winds at 15 to 20 knots for Adak and Atka, and south winds at 20 knots for the western Aleutians. And for the day Sunday, west of Kisk out to Shemya, those winds increasing to 30 knots from the south ahead of that next front pushing in toward the western Aleutians there. Otherwise, light variable winds on Chitka Island, Adak, and Atka at 10 knots, seas down to 2 to 3 feet. And then for the eastern Aleutians, north to northwest winds at 15 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. For the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, winds will be southeast to 20 knots. Same thing for the Pribilofs with 10-foot seas here for St. Paul and St. George, south at 20 for St. Matthew Island. Yukon Delta coast, east winds at 10 knots, northeast winds 15 knots for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. And then for the day on Sunday, north winds 15 knots, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta coast. North winds here at 15 knots also for the Kuskokwim Delta coast and Pribilof Islands. Northwest at 15 for St. Matthew Island. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, we've got south to southeast winds, 15 to 20 knots. Western Central Arctic coast, south winds at 15 knots. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east to northeasterlies at 10 to 15 knots. And moving on to Sunday, northwest winds 10 knots with those seas subsiding to 4 feet for the Central Arctic coast. East side here, west northwest at 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. Light northwest breeze here for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea. Forecast to see a north to northwest wind at 10 knots with seas running about 2 to 3 feet.